Hey, and welcome to futurethinkers.org, a podcast about the evolution of technology, society, and consciousness. I'm Mike Gilliland.
And I'm Yuvia Ivanova. If you're new to the show and you want to get a list of our favorite books, popular episodes, and to join our community, go to futurethinkers.org/start.
Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about the lost art of listening.
So the reason why we chose the subject is because we noticed that in today's noisy world, people seem to have forgotten how to really listen. It's become a lot more about broadcasting or consuming information just kind of very quickly and not critically and not really taking it in. And I think that listening is a really important skill. And so in this episode, we want to kind of go back and discuss how this came about, that people forgot how to listen, and what are some of the ways that they can relearn it.
Mm-hmm. So the main issue, I think, is that there is too much noise out there. There's not a lot of opportunity for people to kind of sit in silence and actually listen. And I'm talking about listening from a lot of different perspectives here. They all kind of fit under this umbrella of an inability to sit still and suppress your own thoughts and desires and listen to someone else or listen to your environment. And, you know, I have an audio background. I was trained as an audio engineer. And for me, listening is a very three-dimensional thing. It has a lot of different facets to it. There's this interpersonal connection and different modes that you can operate from when you're listening to someone. And then there's different ways of streaming different types of audio from a mechanical perspective. So, you know, listening to the air conditioner in the room, or listening to specific notes in a piece of music, or listening to specific instruments, or just sitting in a noisy environment and focusing in on one specific source of sound. So these are the mechanical elements. But from the listening from a place of understanding kind of perspective, it's really important that we do it with the intention to understand the other person. So there's kind of a goal when it comes to true listening and active listening. And the goal is to bring the conversation to a place that makes both participants better off after the conversation has been concluded. And most people don't do it this way. Most people are waiting for their turn to speak, and they don't really hear the person sitting across from them very effectively. And one of the better ways to actually improve this ability is to, well, first of all, you have to have the intention that you want to hear the other person's perspective. And then two, you have to rephrase it for them and say it in a way that they would agree precisely with the point that you've made, the rephrasing of their perspective. I like to call this the ping test. So basically, you as a listener are sending out a ping that the other person's signal has been accepted, interpreted, and understood. And then that person sends the ping back, confirming that it's been received properly, all of the data packets are in place. And this can go in reverse too. When you're trying to send out a point, when you're trying to be understood, you send the ping out, and you ask for that person to kind of rephrase the idea and send it back to you. And then you can confirm or deny whether that is actually, you know, the full data packet is intact.
So let's roll back a little bit further. Why do you think it is that people may not want to understand somebody else?
I would say pretty typically it's a matter of ego involvement. It's because there's somewhat of a competition going on to be heard the most. And people are also just not interested in other people's perspectives. They just, you know, they're more interested in hearing themselves speak and talking about their own lives, and hearing other people speak about their lives is just kind of boring to them. I kind of really disagree with this perspective though, because I mean, we all have spent an approximately similar amount of time on this planet. I mean, on the grand scheme of things, like from a 1,000-year perspective, we're all basically little blips of time. We all have a very unique perspective, having lived all of that time from our own single perspective. We all are really good at some things and really bad at other things, and we can all share things between each other and learn and get better. And I think conversations are best had from that perspective, where you know someone has something to offer you. No matter what kind of credentials they have a unique perspective that they can give you something new and then make you both better off for having heard each other. So I think it's probably a matter of habit of not wanting to listen and wanting to hear yourself, which essentially is just ego.
That reminds me of the Rogerian perspective. Carl Roger was a early 20th century psychologist, psychotherapist, who believed that in a proper therapy session, and as well in any proper relationship, professional, friendship, or romantic relationship, or relationship with your children, that you have to be open to be transformed by every interaction. If you are not open to be transformed, then there's no relationship.
Yeah.
So he believed that when two people come together to communicate, that if you're listening to another person fully, then their words might transform you, and you have to be open to that. And so, as a psychotherapist, he also had to be open to be transformed by what his clients had to say, and not just be, a sterile, kind of unfeeling, detached wall. So do you think that people's ability to listen has gotten worse in recent years?
I would say so, definitely. I mean, there's just too much noise. There's too much pulling your attention in different directions. There's not enough time to really sit down and do nothing and hear nothing and listen to your environment. I mean, people aren't comfortable sitting and doing nothing anymore. They've constantly got to be doing something. So that really affects your ability to listen and process information.
Do you think people's attention skills have really decreased? Is that part of it?
Yeah, it's the same. Yeah.
So what are some ways that people can improve?
Well, just what I've said before about sitting in a quiet room and just being in silence more. I mean, not being afraid to be alone and afraid to be without your device, consuming some sort of media or producing some sort of media. I mean, if you can just sit still and be quiet and be comfortable with that, there's plenty to learn. I mean, the essence of meditation is in that quiet time where the brain is just allowed to, in computer terms, defragment, like put everything, the experience of the day or the week or the year into compartments and boxes and kind of label and organize everything, and then drop them out of your conscious working memory so that you can absorb more data and absorb more of your sensory input. And without doing that, without like having that defragmented process occurring in the brain, then you're highly cluttered. Your thought processes are highly cluttered, and your ability to focus and concentrate is really diminished.
Do you think that people's ability to express themselves on the internet and kind of have these speaking tools at their fingertips is also impacting their ability to listen?
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, definitely. Like when you're talking, you're not listening. Essentially, if you're not absorbing and instead are producing, there's no parallel processing occurring. There's no way you can do both things at the same time. So the fact that people are kind of highly motivated to be producing media, be growing their following, be in the spotlight, and be receiving a lot of attention on a constant basis, and are constantly feeling like they need to be connected on some form with other people, it really has people in this constant state of activity and never being able to shut off. And I mean, it really is an entire set of skills to be able to shut off and let the brain do what it does. Maybe have self-directed thought, creative thought, that sort of thing. Disciplined thought. I mean, all of that comes from just being silent and being still.
I think a part of it is probably also that online interactions are not real interactions.
Mm-hmm.
They don't include the full spectrum of sensory data that you get when you're sitting in the same room with a person face to face. You don't get the body language, you don't get the tone of voice if you're typing in text or emojis, you don't get the facial expressions, you don't get the even the person's like pheromone
Mm.
communication. You're not getting any of that. And so I think you're in a very different mode, communication mode, when you're communicating online. You're probably less open, I would say.
Hmm. Yeah, you're definitely not getting as much sensory input, and it's impossible to get that input. So therefore, you have to take people on the words that they're using, and some people are actually quite terrible at expressing themselves in written word or even in spoken word. And unless you can see the inflections and see the facial expressions and see the body language that goes along with that, then you're kind of forced into a situation where you have to take them at their word. And I mean, that leads to a lot of really poor communication and poor understanding. The thing that people don't seem to understand is that it has to fall on your responsibility to both be understood and to understand. I mean, you have to be a sovereign unit that is good at communication, and that takes both listening and speaking. Communication's a two-sided thing. And I don't mean just listening and sitting there hearing vibrations in your ears and not interpreting them properly. I mean, like, listening is an active process where you're trying to get the other person's perspective. And that's what I mean when earlier I said how important it is to be able to rephrase the other person's perspective. Like, you really have to, that's a lot of work. You really have to seek to understand their perspective and then reformulate it in your own words and hand it back to them and have them confirm or deny whether you understood it from their perspective. That's a very difficult thing to do, but it's a very critical thing to do if you want to have real understanding. But that's the thing. I'm not convinced that people really want to have proper understanding. I mean, there's a reason comedians don't play colleges and universities anymore. It's because the context of why they're there is to entertain people and tell jokes and to get people to think. And when their jokes are taken immediately out of context and quoted in such a way that the context is lost, the meaning is lost, the intention is lost, and they just take them from the exact quote, the exact thing that they said, and remove everything else, then they can wildly change the meaning, the original intent. And the thing is, I don't think you can do that without knowing that you're doing that. I don't think that's like an accident, I think in a lot of cases, people actually don't care about the original intent. They care about the precision of language over intention. And that leads to a lot of problems because language is not perfect and people's use of language is not perfect and people's vocabulary is not the same. Like, we have different ideas of what words mean. And if you have no, I use the word API quite a bit because I have a bit of a programming background. So application programming interface. If you have no interface with another person and the language and the words that they use, and you don't have a common library of words or a way to confirm that your definitions are the same, then you're screwed. Your understanding is assumed. And if you're not doing the confirmation check, then you're lost.
Yeah. I think part of that might have to do with just the constant bombardment of information and data that people have to consume every day, and it's only increasing. And so they're probably just trying to minimize the mental resources that they spend on processing each unit. So they don't have the resources to look into each statement that they see on the internet because there's thousands of them. And so, the smallest unit of information, the meme, is what gets spread. And it's not always accurate or deep enough to convey the whole idea. We click on headlines and comment on the headlines without actually reading the article. How common is that?
Well, it's another problem of people wanting to confirm their own beliefs because that's comfortable. I mean, changing your ideas or updating your models or updating your opinions is a difficult thing to do, and people really don't like doing it. It's very uncomfortable. It means that your worldview or the tools that you have to process the information from the world are not very solid. Mm-hmm. They're not perfect. They're not as good as you thought they were. And so that, for some people, can flip their whole world upside down. Oh, holy shit, like, my world is not what I thought it was. And that's very uncomfortable. So I think people in a lot of cases have this desire to just confirm what they already feel and what they believe. And it ends up creating echo chambers and reducing their desire to hear anything that differs.
I think it could partially do with the overwhelm with all the information. Because if people try to investigate and deeply think about every single piece of data that they receive every day, they would just be in complete chaos and confusion because there's just too much. So I don't know if you can really blame them for that. You know, there's just, they just don't have the processing capacity to deal with all of it. And yeah, sure, you can go on a low information diet where you choose not to consume news or not to go on Facebook or Twitter, and only, read the books that you choose or follow the small number of people that you want to hear from. But even that is becoming difficult for a lot of people. So I think it's partially an environmental pressure that people are just not capable of processing all this data, not that they don't want to.
Yeah, that's possible. I think one thing people are not doing as well is beyond trying to figure out another person's perspective, they're not putting themselves in the other person's shoes, where they understand the needs and the context and the desires of that person. I mean, there are plenty of situations that you could come up with, like getting into a cab and wanting to have a conversation with the cab driver, and the cab driver doesn't want to talk to you at all. Or in the reverse, the cab driver is super chatty and you just want to get to your destination. And when you don't have that desire to connect with each other and really understand each other's intentions and motivations, then you're definitely not going to discover that the other person's not wanting to participate in the conversation, and therefore it'd be best to leave them alone. You're going to be offended and pissed off and, fuck that guy, he wasn't listening to me. So I think there are different kind of modes and kind of hacks or cheat sheets that you can use to understand what motivates people. And one of the videos I watched recently was by Tony Robbins, and he talked about the 6 needs that people have. And I think that's a extremely helpful model to use. The 6 needs are, maybe help me if I'm forgetting.
Certainty.
Yeah, thanks.
Uncertainty or novelty. Love and belonging. Significance or status. And then the 2 kind of growth needs are, growth and giving, or transcending yourself, contribution to society.
So a lot of people will have different needs, and of those 6 needs, and they'll prioritize things in a completely different way. And you can very quickly figure out what their desires and needs are if you use that model and ask, leading questions. So you can sometimes just look at someone's appearance and realize that they're looking for a feeling of significance. They want to be different. They want to be unique. And, they might have a ton of piercings in their face, or they might do, that was a funny example. They might do their hair a funny way, shave one side of their head. Yeah. Other people want to just have love and connection. Other people want to grow and see their life progressing in a certain way at a certain speed and pace. I'm in that category. Like, growth need is just vital to me.
Yeah. I mean, there are other frameworks too that you could use. You could use Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which also has a bunch of the same ones that Tony Robbins talked about. There's the safety needs at the bottom, like physiological needs. Not quite right. Survival needs at the bottom. Right. Physiological needs like breathing, food, air. And then safety needs like shelter and employment and physical safety from violence. Then love and belonging needs. Then esteem needs like recognition, status, power, respect, stuff like that. And then self-actualization needs. So, being the best version of yourself, learning, getting to the bottom of truth, things like that, creativity. And then self-transcendence needs, which is kind of the spiritual needs, giving back to the community, becoming, more than what you're capable of.
Hmm. And you can kind of tell when people are in different states depending on what they get stuck on. Some people will be very worried about money and be worried about the political climate or the actual climate, the environment, and you can kind of tell depending on how heightened their alarm is, what level they're in. And generally, alarm is at those bottom needs. I feel my safety needs are threatened. My ability to just eat and live and be safe. Other people might be more status oriented, and they'll have nice cars, or they'll wear flashy clothes and that kind of thing, and they're looking to show off a status to other people, whether it be to find mates or find friends, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and people can seek status in different ways, actually. It's not necessarily by showing off. It could be by, getting a PhD or becoming, recognized for being a volunteer in their community, even though you're giving, but wanting to be recognized for it as a esteem need. So there are different ways that it expresses.
Yeah.
It's very interesting, actually. A little bit of a side note. This also aligns with the chakra system, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And it's if you look at the 7 chakras, when you stack them on top of each other, it pretty much mirrors Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So you have the safety at the bottom, then creation and procreation in the 2nd chakra, then power in the 3rd chakra, love and belonging, expression and speech, and then clarity of thought and awareness, and then self-transcendence and kind of spiritual needs at the top.
So people might think this is kind of woo, but you can kind of use it symbolically.
Yeah, but also it actually aligns with certain glands in the body and physical functions.
Interesting.
So it's not all symbolic. There are certain parts of the body that kind of correspond to the different functions.
Interesting.
So, but anyway, that's kind of a side note. I think that you can use whichever system of human needs you want.
So back to the communication thing in terms of modes. There's one last thing I'm trying to remember. It's the different modes of communication, different ways of listening, and I might have to pull this up again here. Oh yeah, so it's active, passive, reductive, expansive, and critical and empathetic. So active listening versus passive listening. That's basically, are you trying to understand or are you hearing sounds? Reductive versus expansive. Are you looking for flaws in what is being said? I think that's what that means. Versus...
I always thought that it meant like if you're looking to kind of simplify something, to reduce, or expansive if you're looking to kind of like open up a Pandora's box.
Okay.
That's what I thought it meant.
Okay. You might be right. And then, where is it? And then critical, empathetic.
Right. So critical is you're looking to like pick out flaws, and empathetic is you're looking to kind of put yourself in the other person's shoes.
Achieve some sort of unity.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Any other things that we wanted to talk about?
Well, let's see. So we talked about how we arrived here, where people can't listen. We talked about some of the steps that they can take to learn to listen better, what kind of frameworks they can use to understand people better, and what kind of ways of listening there are.
Mm-hmm. So I think probably a way to wrap this up would be to give some resources. And one of the best books I've ever read about this subject, about understanding, that has actually like changed the way I interact with people at a huge level, because I've been very introverted in the past and very uninterested in other people, very low on the empathy spectrum. And I read this book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, and it showed me exactly what we've talked about in this episode, like how important it is to have a genuine interest in people, how interesting it can be, other people's perspectives, how to be understood, how to listen properly, all of these things. Another good book was The Art of, Nonviolent Communication.
Yeah,
that's
really,
a good one.
Really good one.
And then I just today, in preparation for this episode, was listening to Jordan Peterson's talk on communication. I'm not sure exactly which one it is, so I'll include this in the show notes at the end of the video on the website. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think that's it for this one.
Yeah. Oh, and for me, one recommendation, although it's quite esoteric, Prometheus Rising by Robert
Oh
Anton
yeah,
Wilson.
really
He
good
talks
one.
about the eight circuit model of consciousness, which also mirrors the chakra model and Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And
Yeah.
it's a system that was developed by Timothy Leary and then was later expanded on by Ken Wilber with the spiral dynamics.
Oh yeah, Ken Wilber. That's another one that
Yeah.
highly recommend Ken Wilber stuff.
Mm-hmm.
There's this chart that if you just search Ken Wilber, is it spiral dynamics
I
in
think so.
Google image search? That one's going to be like you could study that for weeks.
Mm-hmm. I would
Yeah, it's
say
really
Ken
deep.
Wilber probably has the most complex and detailed kind of framework for understanding consciousness,
Hmm.
but it's not a beginner thing.
Hmm.
I would say eight circuit model or chakra system is probably a good place to start.
Cool.
Yeah,
All right, that's it.
cool.
This episode is brought to you by Qualia, a nootropic supplement that helps support mental performance and mood. To get 10% off, use the code FUTURE at checkout. And to learn more about neurohacking, visit futurethinkers.org/neuro.
Thanks for tuning in to Future Thinkers. For all the books, resources, and mentions from this episode, go to futurethinkers.org/69. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon to get notified of new videos. You can also follow us on social media to stay connected. If you'd like to get a t-shirt like the new Make America Think Again, go to futurethinkers.org/store. If you like what we do and you want to help us make more podcasts and videos, consider donating or becoming a patron at futurethinkers.org/support. Also visit our sponsor Qualia and use the coupon code FUTURE to get 10% off your purchase.